The dust kicked up around Natalie Richmond's worn boots as she stumbled down the main road of La Junta, Colorado, clutching her small traveling bag against her chest, like it was the only thing keeping her heart from shattering completely. The August sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly on her bonnet-covered head, but the heat outside was nothing compared to the burning shame and terror coursing through her veins as she replayed her father's words over and over in her mind. He had pointed toward the door with a trembling finger, his face red with fury, calling her a disgrace to the family name, while her mother sobbed quietly in the corner, refusing to meet her eyes. At 22 years old, Natalie had thought she knew what heartbreak felt like when Robert had left town without a word 3 months ago. But this was different. This was abandonment by the very people who were supposed to love her no matter what. And now she was alone, 3 months pregnant, with nowhere to go, and less than $5 to her name. She had been walking for nearly 2 hours since her father had quite literally pushed her out the front door of their modest home on the outskirts of town, and her feet ached something fierce inside her leather boots. The main street of La Junta stretched before her, lined with wooden storefronts and establishments that suddenly seemed foreign, despite her having lived here her entire life. Everything looked different now through the lens of her new reality. She was not the respectable daughter of a railroad worker anymore. She was something else entirely, something people would whisper about in church and point at in the general store. The thought made her stomach twist, though whether from anxiety or the morning sickness that had been plaguing her for weeks, she could not tell. Natalie paused near the livery stable, pressing one hand against the rough wooden wall to steady herself. She felt lightheaded, having barely eaten anything that morning before her father had discovered the truth. Her younger sister Caroline had found the letter from the doctor, confirming her condition. And everything had unraveled so quickly after that. There had been shouting, accusations, her father demanding to know who was responsible, her desperate explanation about Robert and how he had promised to marry her, and then her father's cold declaration that no daughter of his would bring such shame upon the family. She had packed what she could in the 10 minutes he had given her, stuffing dresses and undergarments into her bag with shaking hands while her mother wept in the hallway. The sound of hooves on packed dirt made her look up, and she quickly straightened, trying to appear less desperate than she felt. A man on a magnificent chestnut horse was approaching, and even in her distressed state, Natalie could not help but notice the confident way he sat in the saddle. He was tall, that much was obvious even mounted, with dark brown hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His sun-weathered face suggested he spent most of his days outdoors, and there was something solid and dependable about the way he held himself. As he drew closer, she could see his eyes were a warm hazel color, currently fixed on her with what appeared to be concern. "Madam, are you all right?" His voice was deep and kind, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time further south. He pulled his horse to a stop, just a few feet from where she stood, and she noticed the way his gaze took in her disheveled appearance, the traveling bag clutched in her white-knuckled grip. The tear tracks she had not realized were still visible on her dusty cheeks. Natalie opened her mouth to assure him she was fine, that he should not concern himself with her troubles, but what came out instead was a choked sob that horrified her. She pressed her free hand to her mouth, mortified to be breaking down in front of a complete stranger in the middle of town where anyone could see. But the kindness in his eyes had been her undoing, the first gentle thing she had encountered since her world had collapsed that morning. The cowboy dismounted in one smooth motion, looping his horse's reins around the hitching post, before approaching her carefully, as if she were a spooked animal that might bolt at any moment. "Easy now," he said softly. "Whatever it is, it cannot be so bad that we cannot figure something out. My name is James Xavier. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles west of town. What is your name?" "Natalie," she managed to whisper, forcing herself to lower her hand from her mouth and meet his eyes. "Natalie Richmond. And I am afraid things are exactly as bad as they seem, Mr. Xavier. Perhaps worse." James studied her face for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a recognition of genuine distress that seemed to move him. "Are you in danger? Is someone hurting you?" "My family," she said, and then the whole story came tumbling out in a rush of words she could not seem to control. She told him about Robert, about the promises made and broken, about the pregnancy that had sealed her fate, about her father's rage and her mother's tears, and the way she had been cast out like trash to be disposed of. She watched his face as she spoke, waiting for the judgment to appear, for the disgust that would surely make him turn away and leave her standing there alone. But it never came. Instead, his jaw tightened, and something that looked like anger flashed in his eyes, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "How far along are you?" he asked quietly, and the question was so straightforward and lacking in condemnation that it nearly made her cry again. 3 months near enough. The doctor confirmed it 2 weeks ago, and I was still trying to figure out what to do when my sister found the letter. James nodded slowly, then looked down the street toward the hotel. "Do you have money for a room, food?" "I have a little, but not much. Certainly not enough to last more than a few days, and I cannot imagine anyone in this town will hire me once they know." The reality of her situation was crashing over her in waves now, each one threatening to pull her under. "I do not know what I am going to do." The cowboy was quiet for a moment, and she could see him thinking, weighing something in his mind. When he spoke again, his words were so unexpected that she was certain she had misheard him. "Come with me, back to my ranch. I have a housekeeper who lives in town and comes out daily, but the house is big enough for you to have your own room. You can stay there, help out with whatever you are able, and you will have a safe place to be until the baby comes and you figure out your next steps." Natalie stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was offering. "You cannot be serious. You do not even know me. Why would you do such a thing?" "Because it is the right thing to do," James said simply. "And because I know what it is like to have nowhere to turn. My parents died of fever when I was 16, and if good people had not stepped up to help me, I would not have the ranch I have today. Consider it paying forward the kindness that was shown to me." She wanted to argue, to tell him that accepting such charity from a strange man was not proper, that people would talk, that she could not possibly impose on him like that. But the truth was, she had no other options. The alternative was trying to survive on the streets of La Junta with a baby growing inside her and money that would run out before the week was done. She looked into James Xavier's steady hazel eyes and saw nothing but genuine concern and goodwill. Something in her gut, some instinct she did not quite understand, told her she could trust him. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay you for this kindness." "No repayment necessary," he assured her, moving back toward his horse. He retrieved a canteen from his saddlebag and handed it to her. "Drink some water. You look like you're about to fall over. When is the last time you ate?" Natalie accepted the canteen gratefully and took several long swallows before answering. "Last night at supper. This morning was rather chaotic." James frowned at that information. "Well, first things first. We are going to get you a proper meal at the restaurant, and then we will head out to the ranch. I need to pick up a few supplies from the general store anyway. Can you ride?" "Yes, though not well. My father only let me ride the old mare we kept, and she was gentle as could be. That is fine. We will get you situated, and I will keep the pace slow." He studied her for another moment, then added in a gentler voice, "You are safe now, Natalie. I give you my word on that. Nobody is going to hurt you or cast you aside while you are under my protection." The words hit her like a physical thing, wrapping around her like a warm blanket on a cold night. She had not realized how much she needed to hear them until he said them out loud. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief rather than despair. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you so much." James nodded and offered her a small smile that softened the weather-beaten lines of his face. "Come on, let us get some food in you. You look like a strong wind could blow you over." The restaurant was a modest establishment called Martha's Place, and the moment they walked through the door, Natalie could smell fresh bread and cooking meat that made her stomach growl embarrassingly loud. James guided her to a table near the back, pulling out a chair for her with the automatic courtesy of a man who had been raised properly. A middle-aged woman with graying hair and a kind face came over to take their order, and if she was curious about the disheveled young woman sitting with one of the town's more eligible bachelors, she kept it to herself. "I will have the beef stew and cornbread," James said, "and bring the same for the lady, along with a pot of tea if you have it." "Coming right up," the woman said cheerfully, bustling back toward the kitchen. Natalie set her traveling bag on the floor beside her chair and folded her hands in her lap, suddenly uncertain what to say. The enormity of what was happening was beginning to sink in. This morning, she had woken up in her own bed in her family home, and now she was sitting in a restaurant with a stranger who had just offered to take her into his home. It felt surreal, like something out of one of the romance novels her friend Sarah had always been reading. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own anxious thoughts. James leaned back in his chair, and she could see some of the tension leave his shoulders as he talked about something he clearly loved. "It is about 300 acres, mostly grazing land. I run about 200 head of cattle right now, though I am hoping to expand that in the next year or two. The house is nothing fancy, but it is solid, built from good timber and stone. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a parlor, and a proper kitchen. I have 3 ranch hands who work for me. They are good men, respectful, and hardworking. They bunk in the smaller building behind the main house. My housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, comes out every day to help with cooking and cleaning, though I can manage well enough on my own when I need to." "It sounds lovely," Natalie said, and meant it. The picture he painted was one of stability and peace, 2 things that felt very far away from her current reality. "How long have you had the ranch?" "6 years now. I worked as a ranch hand for a man named Samuel Cooper for 4 years after my parents died. Saved every penny I could. When he passed on, his widow sold me a portion of the land at a fair price, and I have been building it up ever since. It has not been easy, but it has been worth it." There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from genuine accomplishment rather than empty boasting. The food arrived then, steaming bowls of thick stew loaded with chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots, along with generous slabs of golden cornbread. Natalie had not realized just how hungry she was until the first bite hit her tongue, and she had to force herself to eat slowly rather than wolfing it down like a starving animal. James ate at a measured pace across from her, occasionally glancing up to make sure she was all right. "May I ask you something?" she ventured after she had eaten about half her bowl. "Of course. Why are you not married? A man with a successful ranch, you must have had opportunities." She felt her cheeks heat as soon as the words left her mouth. "I am sorry. That was too forward of me." But James did not seem offended. He set down his spoon and considered the question. "I suppose I have been too focused on building up the ranch to give much thought to courting. And truthfully, I have not met anyone who made me want to change my priorities. I always figured when the right woman came along, I would know it, and until then, I was content to wait." There was something wistful in his tone that made Natalie wonder if he was lonely out there on his ranch, surrounded by cattle and hired hands, but lacking the companionship of a true partner. She understood loneliness. She had felt it acutely in the 3 months since Robert had disappeared, and now it had compounded with the loss of her family. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and James paid the bill before leading her out to the general store. She waited by his horse while he went inside to gather his supplies, and she could not help but notice the curious looks she was getting from passers-by. News traveled fast in a small town, and she wondered if anyone had heard yet about her disgrace. Her father was a proud man who valued his reputation above all else. Would he tell people she had left of her own accord, or would he admit the truth? Neither option seemed particularly appealing. James emerged from the store carrying a crate filled with various goods, which he secured to his saddle with practiced efficiency. "All set. Are you ready to go?" Natalie nodded, squaring her shoulders. "As ready as I will ever be." He helped her up onto his horse first, then swung up behind her in one fluid motion. His arms came around her to grasp the reins, and she stiffened slightly at the proximity, very aware of his solid presence at her back. But there was nothing improper in the way he held himself, nothing that made her feel unsafe. If anything, she felt protected, cocooned in the circle of his arms as they began the ride out of town. The landscape around La Junta was beautiful in its own stark way, all rolling plains and distant mountains, with the Arkansas River cutting a meandering path through the valley. The afternoon sun was still hot, but a breeze had picked up that made the heat more bearable. They passed fields where cattle grazed peacefully, and the occasional farmhouse set back from the road. James kept the horse at an easy walk, true to his word about not pushing the pace. "That is the western boundary of my land just up ahead," he said, after they had been riding for about 40 minutes, pointing toward a fence line that stretched into the distance. "The house is another 10 minutes or so beyond that." True to his estimate, they crested a gentle rise, and Natalie caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home, at least temporarily. The ranch house was exactly as he had described it, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and several large windows that would let in plenty of natural light. A barn and several outbuildings were visible behind it, and she could see cattle dotting the landscape in multiple directions. It was peaceful and isolated, far enough from town that she would not have to worry about running into people who knew her, at least not right away. As they approached the house, a man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was older than James, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent working outdoors. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Natalie, but he recovered quickly and approached to take the horse's reins as James dismounted. "Tom, this is Miss Natalie Richmond. She's going to be staying with us for a while, helping out around the house. Natalie, this is Tom Sullivan, my foreman and one of the best men you will ever meet." Tom tipped his hat politely. "Madam, welcome to the Xavier Ranch." "Thank you," Natalie said, accepting James's help in dismounting. Her legs felt shaky after the ride, and she was grateful for his steadying hand on her elbow. "Where are Pete and Jack?" James asked Tom. "Out checking the north pasture fence. They should be back before supper." "Good. Can you take care of the horse? I'm going to show Miss Richmond to her room and get her settled." Tom nodded and led the horse toward the barn, while James picked up the crate of supplies in one arm and Natalie's traveling bag in the other, gesturing for her to follow him up the porch steps. The front door opened into a spacious entryway with a staircase leading to the second floor. To the left, she could see a parlor with comfortable-looking furniture and a stone fireplace, and to the right was what appeared to be a dining room. Everything was clean and well-maintained, though there was a distinctly masculine feel to the decor. "The kitchen is through there," James said, nodding toward a doorway at the back of the dining room. "Help yourself to anything you need. Mrs. Patterson usually arrives around 7 in the morning and stays until after supper is cleaned up. She is a good woman, a widow who lost her husband to a mining accident a few years back. I think you will like her." He led her upstairs, where a hallway stretched in both directions. "My room is at the far end on the right. The other 3 bedrooms are all available, but I think you might like this one." He opened a door to reveal a pleasant room with a large window overlooking the front of the property. There was a bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and even a small writing desk with a chair. It was more than she had expected, comfortable and private. "This is wonderful," Natalie said softly, stepping inside and setting her hand on the bed frame. "Thank you, James, truly." He set her bag down near the dresser and the crate just inside the doorway. "I will let you get settled. There is water in the pitcher and clean towels in the dresser's bottom drawer. Take your time, rest if you need to. Supper will be around 6, and you are welcome to join us in the dining room or take a tray up here if you prefer. No pressure either way." "I would like to join you," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Despite everything that had happened, despite her exhaustion and fear and uncertainty, she did not want to hide away in this room like she had something to be ashamed of. James had offered her kindness and shelter, and the least she could do was be present and help where she could. His face brightened at that. "I am glad. I will see you in a few hours then." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Natalie sank down onto the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. She looked around the room that was now hers, at least for the time being, and tried to process everything that had happened since sunrise. She had been disowned by her family, taken in by a stranger, and transported to a cattle ranch in the middle of the Colorado plains, all in the span of less than 12 hours. It was overwhelming, but underneath the fear and confusion, there was also a tiny spark of something else. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the land stretched before her. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing peacefully, and even further out, the mountains rose against the horizon like ancient sentinels. It was beautiful and vast and intimidating all at once. Somewhere out there was the life she had known, the family who had rejected her, the town that would judge her. But here, in this room, in this house, she was safe. James had promised her that, and something told her he was a man who kept his promises. Natalie turned from the window and began to unpack her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her personal items on the dresser. When she opened the crate James had brought up, she found it contained additional supplies, a new hairbrush, some soap that smelled like lavender, a couple of books, and several yards of fabric that would be perfect for sewing new clothes as her pregnancy progressed and her current dresses no longer fit. The thoughtfulness of it made her throat tight with emotion. He had purchased these things for her, a woman he had met only hours ago, without even knowing if she would accept his offer of help. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed the dust and tear tracks from her face, then took down her hair and brushed it out before repinning it in a simple style. She changed into a fresh dress, one of her nicer ones, in a soft blue cotton that brought out her eyes. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser, she saw a young woman who looked tired and uncertain, but not defeated. That was something, at least. The hours until supper passed quietly. Natalie sat in the chair by the window, watching the sun make its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She saw James emerge from the house at one point, heading toward the barn, and later watched him and Tom working together to move some cattle from one pasture to another. There was a rhythm to their movements, the efficiency of people who had worked together long enough to anticipate each other's actions. As 6 o'clock approached, she made her way downstairs, following the sound of voices and the smell of cooking food to the kitchen. Mrs. Patterson was there, a plump woman in her 50s with rosy cheeks and sharp but kind eyes. She was stirring something on the stove while James set the dining room table. He looked up when Natalie appeared in the doorway and smiled. "Good timing. Everything is just about ready. Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Richmond. Natalie, this is Mrs. Patterson, who keeps this house running smoothly." The older woman turned from the stove and looked Natalie up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who missed very little. But her expression was warm when she spoke. "Nice to meet you, dear. Mr. Xavier mentioned you would be staying with us for a while. I hope you are settling in all right." "I am, thank you. Is there anything I can help with?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes crinkled with approval. "You can help Mr. Xavier finish setting the table if you like. I have got everything else under control here." The three ranch hands joined them for supper, sitting down at the long dining table that could easily accommodate 8 people. Tom she had already met, and James introduced her to the other 2. Pete Walker was a young man, probably not much older than Natalie herself, with sandy blonde hair and an easy smile. Jack Brennan was somewhere in between Tom and Pete in age, quiet and reserved, but polite when he nodded his greeting. The meal was simple but hearty: roasted chicken with potatoes and green beans, and fresh bread that Mrs. Patterson had baked that afternoon. The conversation flowed easily around the table, the men discussing the day's work and plans for the coming week. They treated Natalie with respectful courtesy, including her in the conversation without being intrusive. She could tell James had said something to them about her situation because nobody asked personal questions or seemed surprised by her presence. After supper, Mrs. Patterson began clearing the dishes, and Natalie immediately stood to help. "Please, let me. You cooked this wonderful meal. The least I can do is help clean up." "I will not say no to an extra pair of hands," the older woman said with a smile. They worked together in the kitchen, washing and drying dishes while James and the men went back outside to tend to some evening chores. Mrs. Patterson chatted amiably about the ranch and the town, filling Natalie in on various bits of local news and gossip. Though she carefully avoided asking anything too personal, it was comfortable and domestic, and Natalie found herself relaxing into the routine of it. "Mr. Xavier is a good man," Mrs. Patterson said as they were finishing up. "One of the best I have ever known. You are lucky to have found help with him." "I know," Natalie said softly. "I still cannot quite believe his kindness. Most people would have just walked past me on that street." Mrs. Patterson paused in her work, turning to look at Natalie directly. "He sees people, truly sees them. That is a rare quality, and he has a strong sense of what is right and wrong. If he has taken you under his protection, you can trust that he will see it through, whatever challenges might come." The words were both reassuring and slightly ominous, a reminder that there would indeed be challenges ahead, but Natalie was grateful for the endorsement nonetheless. She had placed her trust in a stranger today out of sheer desperation, but it was becoming clear that James Xavier was exactly the kind of man worthy of that trust. When Mrs. Patterson left for the evening, heading back to her small house in town, in the wagon James had arranged for her, Natalie found herself alone with James in the parlor. He had lit a fire in the fireplace, more for light and comfort than warmth on this August evening, and was sitting in one of the armchairs reading through some papers that looked like ranch accounts. She settled into the chair across from him with one of the books he had purchased, a novel she had been wanting to read. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of pages turning. It felt oddly peaceful, this quiet domesticity with a man she barely knew. After about an hour, James set aside his papers and looked over at her. "How are you feeling? Truly?" Natalie closed her book, marking her place with a finger. "Overwhelmed, grateful, terrified. A little bit of everything, I suppose." He nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable given what you have been through today. I want you to know that you do not have to hide your condition here. Everyone on this ranch knows the situation and understands. You are safe to just be yourself, whatever that looks like." The kindness in his words made her eyes sting with unshed tears again. "Why are you doing this? And please do not just say because it is the right thing. There must be more to it than that." James was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost hesitant. "My mother found herself in a similar situation before she married my father. She was 17, pregnant by a man who refused to take responsibility. Her family was going to send her away to have the baby in secret and give it up for adoption. But my father, who had been courting her sister at the time, stepped in and offered to marry her instead. He gave her and my older brother a home and a name, and he loved them both as if that brother had been his own blood. I grew up watching the way he honored that commitment, the way he never once made my mother feel less than cherished. He showed me what real strength looks like and what it means to protect someone vulnerable. So, yes, helping you is the right thing to do, but it is also honoring the example my father set for me." Natalie felt her breath catch in her chest. "That is a beautiful story. Your father sounds like he was an extraordinary man. He was. I only wish he had lived long enough for me to tell him how much I admired him. I was too young and stupid at 16 to fully appreciate what I had until it was gone." "I am sure he knew," Natalie said softly. "Parents usually do." They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from topic to topic with the ease of old friends rather than new acquaintances. James told her more about the ranch and his plans for expansion, and she found herself opening up about her life before today, carefully skirting around the painful parts but sharing memories of her childhood, her education at the small schoolhouse in town, her love of reading and sketching. It felt good to talk about something other than her current predicament, to remember that she was more than just her mistakes and misfortunes. Finally, as the fire burned down to embers, James stood and offered her his hand. "We should both get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a full day, and I imagine you are exhausted." She accepted his help, standing, very aware of the warmth of his hand around hers. "Thank you again, James, for everything. I do not think I have adequately expressed how much your kindness means to me." "You do not need to thank me," he said, releasing her hand with what seemed like reluctance. "Just focus on taking care of yourself and that baby. Everything else will work itself out in time." Natalie climbed the stairs to her room, feeling lighter than she had all day. She changed into her nightgown and crawled between the clean sheets, her body sinking into the comfortable mattress with a sigh of relief. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the night sky like diamonds on black velvet, more visible out here than they had ever been in town. She thought about her family, wondered if they were thinking of her, if her mother was crying, if her father had any regrets. But the thoughts did not hurt quite as sharply as they had this morning. Perhaps that was just exhaustion, or perhaps it was the beginning of healing. Either way, she was grateful for it. Sleep claimed her quickly, and for the first time in weeks, she did not dream of Robert or abandonment or shame. Instead, she dreamed of wide-open spaces and hazel eyes and a voice saying, "You are safe now." The next few weeks fell into a comfortable routine that surprised Natalie with how quickly she adapted to it. She woke each morning to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle, dressed in clothes that were becoming more comfortable as her body slowly changed, and made her way downstairs to help Mrs. Patterson with breakfast. The older woman had taken her under her wing immediately, teaching her ranch-style cooking and sharing stories about her own life with the easy affection of someone who was starved for female companionship. Natalie's days were filled with domestic tasks that she found surprisingly satisfying. She helped with cooking and cleaning, mended shirts and socks for the ranch hands, tended the small vegetable garden behind the house, and in the afternoons, she often sat on the porch with her sketching paper, drawing the landscape that surrounded her. Her artistic skills, which had always been more of a pleasant pastime than a serious pursuit, were improving with the practice and the inspiring subject matter. But it was the evenings she looked forward to most, those quiet hours after supper when she and James would sit together in the parlor. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and opinions, debating the news from the papers James had delivered from town, reading passages aloud from books they both enjoyed. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh, and that he was far more well-read than she would have expected from a cowboy. He had a particular fondness for poetry, which he admitted somewhat sheepishly, as if expecting her to mock him for it. "I find it beautiful," she had told him, "that someone who spends his days working with cattle and horses also appreciates the written word. There is no shame in that." As August gave way to September, Natalie found herself thinking less about the life she had lost, and more about the life she was building here on the ranch. Her morning sickness had finally subsided, replaced by an appetite that Mrs. Patterson delighted in feeding. She was starting to show now, just a slight rounding of her belly that was still easy to hide beneath her loose dresses, but she knew it would not be long before her condition became obvious to anyone who looked at her. The ranch hands treated her with unfailing respect, Pete often going out of his way to make her laugh with his silly jokes, and even Quiet Jack occasionally engaging her in conversation about the books he saw her reading. Tom had a protective streak that reminded her painfully of what her father had once been like, before disappointment and rigid morality had turned him cold. She felt safe here, valued in a way she had not expected. But it was her growing feelings for James that both thrilled and terrified her. She had not intended to develop romantic emotions for him. She had told herself that gratitude and affection were natural responses to his kindness, but nothing more. Yet she could not deny the way her heart sped up when he smiled at her, or the warmth that spread through her chest when his hand accidentally brushed hers while passing a book, or the way she found herself watching for him through the window when he was out working on the ranch. She was falling in love with him, and that realization was both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful because James Xavier was everything Robert had pretended to be: honorable, kind, steady, genuine. James kept his word, worked hard, treated everyone with respect, and had shown her more consideration in a few weeks than Robert had in the months they had been courting. Terrible because she had no right to those feelings, not when she was carrying another man's child, not when she was here only because of James's charity, not when she had already proven herself to be such a poor judge of character. One evening in mid-September, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. James had his chair tipped back on two legs, his boots propped up on the porch railing, and Natalie was working on embroidering a pillowcase, a domestic hobby that Mrs. Patterson had recently taught her. "I need to go into town tomorrow," James said, breaking the comfortable silence. "We need supplies, and I have some business to attend to at the bank. Would you like to come with me, or would you rather stay here?" Natalie's needle paused mid-stitch. She had not been back to La Junta since the day James had found her, had been avoiding even the thought of facing the people who had surely heard about her disgrace by now. But she could not hide forever, and part of her wanted to prove to herself and everyone else that she was not ashamed, even if that was not entirely true. "I would like to come," she said, surprised by her own courage. "There are a few things I need from the mercantile, and I should probably check if there has been any mail for me." She did not expect any, but there was a small, stubborn part of her that hoped her mother might have written, might have found a way to reach out even if her father forbade it. James brought his chair back down on all four legs and turned to look at her. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel pressured. People can be cruel with their gossip and judgment. I know, but I cannot hide out here forever, and I would rather face it with you beside me than alone." Something shifted in his expression at those words, a softness that made her heart flutter. "All right then. We will leave after breakfast, and Natalie, if anyone says anything unkind to you, they will answer to me." The protective edge in his voice made her feel cherished in a way that was both foreign and addictive. "Thank you, James." The trip into town the next morning was beautiful, the September air crisp and cool with the promise of autumn on its way. They took the wagon rather than riding, which was more comfortable and practical for transporting supplies. Natalie wore one of her nicer dresses and had taken extra care with her hair, wanting to look respectable and put together. Her traveling cloak hid the small swell of her belly, though she knew it was only a matter of time before that would no longer be possible. As they rolled down the main street of La Junta, Natalie felt her stomach twist with anxiety. She saw familiar faces, people who had known her all her life, and watched their expressions change when they recognized her sitting beside James Xavier. Some looked away quickly, while others stared with undisguised curiosity. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, determined not to show how much their judgment stung. James handled his business at the bank, while Natalie went to the general store, Mrs. Patterson having given her a detailed list of needed supplies. The storekeeper, Mr. Hanson, greeted her with strained politeness that was a far cry from the friendly banter they had always shared before. She gathered the items on her list quickly and efficiently, paying with the money James had insisted she take from the household fund. As she was leaving the store, arms full of packages, she nearly collided with someone entering. She looked up to find herself face to face with her younger sister Caroline. The 16-year-old's eyes went wide, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Natalie," Caroline finally whispered, glancing around as if afraid of being seen talking to her disgraced older sister. "Caroline, how are you? How is Mother?" "She cries all the time," Caroline said, her young face troubled. "She misses you terribly, but Father forbids anyone from speaking your name in the house. He says you made your choice, and now you must live with the consequences." The words hurt, but Natalie had expected as much from her father. "And you? What do you think?" Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "I think you are my sister, and I do not understand how Father can just cast you out like you were never part of our family. I miss you, Natalie. The house is not the same without you." Before Natalie could respond, James appeared at her side, taking the heavy packages from her arms. "Let me help you with those." He looked at Caroline with polite curiosity. "You must be Natalie's sister. I can see the family resemblance." Caroline stared at him with wide eyes, clearly recognizing him by reputation, if not by sight. "You are James Xavier, the one who took my sister in." "I am, and I am very glad I found her that day. She has been a tremendous help on the ranch, and wonderful company besides." The way he spoke about Natalie, with genuine warmth and respect, made Caroline's expression soften. "Thank you for being kind to her. Not many would be." "Then not many have the character I thought they did," James said simply. "Your sister is a remarkable woman who deserves kindness and support, not judgment." Natalie felt her throat tighten with emotion. She reached out and squeezed Caroline's hand. "If you can, write to me. General delivery at the La Junta post office should reach me. I would love to hear from you." "I will try," Caroline promised. "I have to go. Father sent me to pick up his order, and I am already taking too long." She hesitated, then quickly hugged Natalie before pulling away and hurrying into the store. Natalie blinked back tears as James guided her toward the wagon. They loaded the supplies in silence, and she was grateful he did not try to make her talk about the encounter right away. They made one more stop at the post office, where there was indeed a letter waiting for her. Her heart leaped when she saw her mother's handwriting, and she clutched the envelope to her chest like it was precious treasure. On the ride back to the ranch, James finally broke the silence. "Are you all right?" "I do not know," Natalie admitted. "Seeing Caroline was harder than I expected. She is just a child, caught in the middle of all this. She seems like a sweet girl. I hope she does write to you. You should not be cut off from everyone you love." Natalie turned the envelope over in her hands, not yet ready to open it in case its contents were disappointing. "Thank you for what you said back there. About me being remarkable. You did not have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did," James said firmly. "And I meant every word. You are remarkable, Natalie. The way you have handled everything that has been thrown at you, the strength you have shown, the grace with which you carry yourself, despite everything. It is extraordinary. Do not let anyone, including your father, make you believe otherwise." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity blazing in his hazel eyes. Something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that neither was quite brave enough to voice out loud. Her hand moved almost of its own accord, reaching across the wagon seat to rest on his arm. "You are a good man, James Xavier, one of the best I have ever known." His hand covered hers, warm and strong. "You make me want to be better than I am." They rode the rest of the way home in silence, but it was the comfortable kind, full of unspoken understanding and shared warmth. When they arrived back at the ranch, Natalie finally opened her mother's letter in the privacy of her room. The words inside were achingly loving and sorrowful. Her mother wrote about how much she missed Natalie, how she did not agree with her father's decision to cast her out, but how she had to respect his authority as the head of the household. She begged Natalie to take care of herself and the baby, expressed relief that she had found a safe place to stay, and promised to pray for her every day. There was no promise of reconciliation, no indication that her father might soften his stance, but the love in every line was unmistakable. Natalie cried as she read it, tears of loss and grief and love mingling together. But underneath the pain was also a growing sense of acceptance. Her old life was gone, and perhaps that was not entirely a bad thing. She had been so focused on being the perfect daughter, the respectable young lady, that she had never really asked herself what she wanted. Robert had seemed like the right choice because he was charming and handsome and came from a good family, not because he had made her heart race or challenged her mind or treated her with genuine respect. James did all those things. James, who had shown her more real caring in a few weeks than Robert had in months. James, who defended her to her own sister and looked at her like she was someone precious rather than someone ruined. James, who made her feel safe and valued and, dare she think it, cherished. The autumn weeks passed in a blur of work and laughter and quiet moments that felt increasingly intimate. Natalie's pregnancy was becoming more obvious now, her belly rounding out enough that loose dresses could no longer fully conceal it. Mrs. Patterson had helped her let out some of her clothes and had sewn several new dresses from the fabric James had bought, designed to accommodate her changing shape. The older woman had also started teaching her about childbirth and what to expect, practical information that both reassured and terrified Natalie. James had become increasingly protective as her pregnancy progressed, insisting she not lift heavy things or overexert herself. He had moved some of the furniture in the parlor to create a more comfortable seating area where she could prop her feet up, and he often brought her little gifts from town, a book he thought she might enjoy, a special tea Mrs. Patterson had recommended for pregnant women, a beautiful shawl and soft wool for the coming winter months. They had fallen into an easy domesticity that felt like a marriage in all but name. They ate their meals together, spent their evenings in each other's company, shared their thoughts and dreams and fears with increasing openness. The ranch hands treated them like a couple, and Mrs. Patterson had taken to giving Natalie knowing looks that suggested she saw exactly what was developing between them. But neither Natalie nor James had spoken directly about their feelings or what the future might hold. She sensed he was holding back, giving her space to heal from her earlier heartbreak and figure out what she wanted without pressure. She appreciated that consideration, but she also wished he would just tell her what she could see so clearly in his eyes every time he looked at her. One evening in late October, with the first real cold snap of the season making the fire in the parlor particularly welcome, James set down the book he had been reading and cleared his throat. Natalie looked up from the baby blanket she was knitting, a skill Mrs. Patterson had patiently taught her. "There is something I need to say to you, and I need you to just listen until I am finished, because if I do not get it all out at once, I might lose my nerve." Her heart began to pound. "All right." James stood and moved to crouch in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his. "I know that you came here out of desperation, and that I offered you shelter out of kindness, and that we have only known each other a few months. I know that you are carrying another man's child, and that you have been through tremendous upheaval and pain. And I know that I probably should wait longer before saying this, should give you more time to heal and find your footing. But, Natalie, I am in love with you. Completely. Irrevocably in love with you. I love your strength and your kindness and your sharp mind. I love the way you laugh at Pete's terrible jokes, and the way you are patient with Mrs. Patterson's stories, even though she repeats them. I love watching you sketch on the porch and the little furrow that appears between your eyebrows when you are concentrating. I love everything about you, including that baby you are carrying, because that child is part of you." Natalie felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were happy tears. "James, let me finish," he said gently. "I am not asking you to make any decisions right now. I am not asking you to love me back, though I hope someday you might. I just need you to know that you are not alone, that you are treasured, and that if you would be willing, I would be honored to call you my wife and to raise this child as my own. Not because I feel obligated, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it now. You have become essential to me, Natalie, as necessary as breathing." She could not speak for a moment, her throat too tight with emotion. When she finally found her voice, it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon or that I had no right to those feelings, but I cannot help it. I love you, James. You are everything I did not know I needed, Everything I should have been looking for all along. You make me feel safe and valued and beautiful. Even now when I am growing rounder by the day, and my feet swell and I cry at the smallest things. James let out a breathless laugh, reaching up to wipe the tears from her cheeks. You are beautiful. You have never been more beautiful than you are right now, full of life and strength and love. Then yes, she said, covering his hands with hers. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I want to build a life with you. Yes to everything, James. Yes. He pulled her gently from the chair and into his arms. And when he kissed her, it was sweet and tender and full of promise. It was nothing like the hungry, demanding kisses Robert had given her, the ones that had made her feel like she was being taken from rather than shared with. This was different, a joining of equals, a celebration of mutual affection and respect. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and smiling like fools. We should get married soon, James said. Before the baby comes, I want you to have my name, and I want everyone to know that this child is mine in every way that matters. What will people say? They will know the timing does not add up. I do not give a damn what people say, James said fiercely. Let them think what they want. We know the truth, and that is all that matters. Besides, people are always more forgiving of a married couple with a child, even if the timing seems suspect, than they are of an unwed mother. He was right, and Natalie knew it. A quiet wedding and James's public claim of the child as his own would go a long way toward protecting her reputation and, more importantly, protecting her baby from the stigma of illegitimacy. All right, when? Next week? We can go into town, speak to the minister, have a simple ceremony. Mrs. Patterson can stand as your witness, and Tom can stand as mine. Next week, Natalie agreed, feeling giddy and terrified, and more hopeful than she had been in months. That sounds perfect. They were married on the first Saturday in November, in a simple ceremony at the small church in La Junta. Natalie wore a new dress Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, a beautiful dove-gray silk that accommodated her now prominent belly while still making her feel feminine and pretty. James wore his best suit, and the look in his eyes when he saw her walking down the aisle made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The minister, Reverend Hartley, performed the ceremony with dignified solemnity, asking no questions about the pregnancy that was obvious to anyone who looked at the bride. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears throughout, and Tom watched with visible approval. Pete and Jack had come as well, sitting in the back pew and grinning broadly. A few other townspeople were scattered throughout the church, drawn by curiosity more than affection. But Natalie found she did not care. All that mattered was James, standing beside her and promising to love and cherish her for the rest of their lives. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. She was Natalie Xavier now, wife to a good man, and mother to be to a child who would have a father who chose to love them. It was more than she had dared to hope for in those dark days back in August. They held a small reception at the ranch house, Mrs. Patterson having prepared an impressive spread of food despite the short notice. The ranch hands toasted the happy couple, and even quiet Jack made a speech about how it was good to see the boss finally settling down with such a fine woman. As the evening wore on and their guests finally departed, Natalie and James found themselves alone in the house for the first time as husband and wife. James led her upstairs, not to her old room, but to his own, which was now theirs to share. He had clearly made an effort to make the space more welcoming for her, adding fresh curtains to the windows and clearing space in the wardrobe and dresser for her belongings. There were wildflowers in a vase on the bedside table, their cheerful colors brightening the masculine space. I thought we could move your things tomorrow, James said, suddenly seeming nervous. Unless you would prefer to keep your old room. Natalie turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. I want to be here with you. I want to fall asleep beside you and wake up to your face. I want everything that comes with being your wife, James. The nervousness in his expression melted into something warmer, deeper. I want that too. But Natalie, I want you to know that we can take things slowly. The baby comes first, and your comfort and well-being. There is no pressure for anything physical tonight or any night until you are ready. She loved him even more for that consideration, for the way he always put her needs first. But she was ready. Had been ready for weeks if she was honest with herself. She wanted to be his wife in every sense of the word. wanted to replace the hurtful memories of her encounters with Robert with new ones built on love and trust. "I am ready," she said softly. "I want this, James. I want you." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and she felt herself melting into him. They undressed each other slowly, reverently, James's hands gentle on her changing body. He whispered words of love and admiration, telling her how beautiful she was, how perfect, until she almost believed it herself. When they finally came together, it was everything her first experiences had not been, tender and passionate and joyful. A true union of two people who loved and cherished each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Natalie's head resting on James's chest, as his fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. The baby kicked, a strong flutter against her belly, and she laughed softly. "Did you feel that?" she asked, guiding James's hand to where the movement had been. They waited, and after a moment, the baby kicked again, right against his palm. The look of wonder that crossed James's face was so pure and beautiful that it made Natalie's eyes sting with tears. "That is incredible," he breathed. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." The casual way he claimed the child, with no hesitation or qualification, made Natalie fall in love with him all over again. "You are going to be an amazing father." "I am going to try my best," James said, pulling her closer. "For both of you." The winter months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. James converted one of the unused bedrooms into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and sanding it until it was smooth as glass. Natalie sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. Mrs. Patterson provided a steady stream of advice about babies and child rearing, some solicited and some not, but all delivered with obvious affection. Natalie received 3 more letters from her mother over those months, each one expressing love and support while carefully avoiding any mention of her father. Caroline wrote 2, long, rambling letters about school and her friends and small-town gossip, always ending with how much she missed her sister. Natalie treasured those letters, even as she accepted that a reconciliation with her father was unlikely. She had a new family now, one that she had chosen and that had chosen her in return. As her due date approached in late February, Natalie found herself growing increasingly nervous. Mrs. Patterson had arranged for the town doctor to be on call when the time came, and she would be there to help with the delivery as well. James had been assured by multiple people that his presence would not be needed or wanted during the actual birth, but he had stubbornly refused to promise he would stay away. "If you need me, I will be there," he had said firmly. "I do not care about propriety or tradition. You are my wife, and I am not leaving you to go through that alone." The labor began on a cold February morning, just as the sun was rising over the mountains. Natalie woke to cramping pains that she initially tried to ignore, but that quickly became too intense to dismiss. James sent Pete racing into town to fetch Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Patterson, while he helped Natalie down to the kitchen where they could heat water and gather supplies. The next 12 hours were the longest of Natalie's life. The pain was worse than anything she had imagined, waves of agony that crashed over her again and again until she thought she might break from it. True to his word, James stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement, even when she snapped at him in her pain. Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Morrison worked efficiently between contractions, and finally, as the sun was setting on what had been the hardest day of Natalie's life, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Natalie's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Natalie looked down at her son through eyes blurred with tears of exhaustion and joy and overwhelming love. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air as he cried his displeasure at being thrust into the cold world. She looked up at James, who was staring at the baby, with an expression of such wonder and love that it took her breath away. "Our son," she whispered. "Our son," James agreed, leaning down to kiss her forehead, and then gently touching one finger to the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately grasped it with surprising strength, and James let out a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Hello, little one. Welcome to the family." They named him Jacob Samuel Xavier, Jacob for James's father, and Samuel for the man who had given James his start in ranching. Little Jake, as he quickly became known, was a surprisingly easy baby after the drama of his entrance into the world. He nursed well, slept in decent stretches, and seemed content to be passed around among the various adults who were already hopelessly in love with him. Natalie recovered slowly from the birth, grateful for Mrs. Patterson's help and James's unwavering support. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Jake when he was fussy, and sat beside Natalie during nighttime feedings, keeping her company in those quiet, dark hours when it was just the three of them. Watching James with Jake, seeing the gentle way he handled the tiny baby and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, Natalie fell in love with her husband all over again. He had promised to raise Jake as his own, and he was keeping that promise in every way that mattered. In those early weeks, Natalie sometimes thought about Robert, wondered briefly where he was and what he was doing, but those thoughts were fleeting and held no real emotion. Robert had given her a precious gift in Jake, even if unintentionally, but James was the boy's real father in every way that counted. Spring came early to Colorado that year, and with it, an unexpected visitor. Natalie was sitting on the porch with Jake sleeping in her arms when she saw a familiar figure approaching on foot up the long drive. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized her mother, older and more tired-looking than Natalie remembered, but unmistakably her mother nonetheless. Mrs. Richmond stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, her eyes fixed on her daughter and grandson. "Hello, Natalie." "Mother." Natalie's voice came out steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "What are you doing here?" "I had to see you, had to see my grandson. I know your father would be furious if he knew I came, but I could not stay away any longer." She took a tentative step up onto the porch. "May I?" Natalie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her mother approached slowly and sat in the chair beside her, looking down at Jake with tears streaming down her face. "He is beautiful. What is his name?" "Jacob Samuel Xavier. We call him Jake." "Xavier," her mother repeated softly. "So you married him, the cowboy who took you in?" "I did. And mother, he is a good man, the best man I have ever known. He loves Jake like his own, and he loves me in a way I did not know was possible." Her mother reached out a tentative hand to stroke Jake's soft hair. "I can see that. The way Mrs. Patterson talks about him in town, the way your sister described meeting him that day, I knew he must be special. I am glad you found someone worthy of you, Natalie. I am sorry it could not have been under different circumstances." They talked for over an hour, slowly bridging the gap that had opened between them. Her mother apologized for not standing up to her father, for allowing Natalie to be cast out. Though she maintained she had little choice in the matter, Natalie found she could not hold on to her anger or resentment. Her mother was a product of her time and circumstances, a woman who had been taught that a wife's duty was to defer to her husband's judgment. She had loved Natalie as best she could within those constraints. When James came in from the fields for lunch, Natalie introduced him to her mother, watching as the older woman took in his steady gaze and respectful manner. She could see the exact moment her mother understood what Natalie had tried to tell her, the moment she recognized that her daughter had indeed married a man of genuine character. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter," Mrs. Richmond said to James. "Thank you for giving her and my grandson a home and a family." "It is I who should be thanking Natalie," James replied. "She has made my house a home and given my life, meaning I did not know it was missing. I am the fortunate one in this arrangement." Mrs. Richmond left that afternoon with promises to visit again when she could manage it without her husband's knowledge. It was not the full reconciliation Natalie might have hoped for, but it was something, a beginning of healing. She stood on the porch with James's arm around her waist and Jake in her arms, watching her mother's retreating figure until she disappeared over the rise. "Are you all right?" James asked softly. "I am," Natalie said, and realized she meant it. "I wish things could be different with my father, but I cannot control his choices. I can only control my own. And I choose this, James. I choose you and Jake and the life we are building together. I choose love and forgiveness and moving forward." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I choose you too. Every day for the rest of my life, I choose you." The years that followed were rich with love and work and the beautiful chaos of raising a family. Jake grew into a bright, energetic boy who idolized his father and followed him around the ranch like a devoted shadow. When he was 3, Natalie gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Rose, who brought new joy and mayhem into their lives. 2 years after that came another son, Matthew, who was as quiet and thoughtful as Jake was boisterous. The ranch prospered under James's careful management, expanding to nearly 500 acres with a herd of over 400 cattle. They built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and James hired additional ranch hands to help manage the increased workload. Through it all, he remained the same steady, loving man he had always been, devoted to his family and his land in equal measure. Natalie's relationship with her mother continued, with Mrs. Richmond visiting several times a year and writing regularly. Caroline came to visit often as well, becoming a beloved aunt to the Xavier children. When Caroline turned 18, she made the bold decision to move to La Junta proper and take a job as a teacher at the schoolhouse, much to her father's displeasure. But she was following her older sister's example, choosing her own path rather than allowing fear or propriety to dictate her choices. Mr. Richmond never softened his stance toward Natalie. She would sometimes see him in town on the rare occasions she went in, and he would look right through her as if she did not exist. It hurt, but less and less as the years passed. She had made peace with his rejection, understanding that his inability to forgive said more about his limitations than her worth. Jake never asked about his biological father, accepting without question that James was his papa in every way that mattered. When he was 12, Natalie told him the truth about his conception and birth, wanting him to hear it from her rather than from town gossip. He had listened quietly, then hugged her fiercely and said, "It does not change anything, Mama. Papa is my father. He has always been my father." On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Natalie with a trip to Denver, their first time away from the ranch and children since they had married. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at elegant restaurants, and wandered through art galleries and museums like young sweethearts. On their last evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from their hotel room window, James pulled her into his lap and held her close. "Do you ever regret how we started?" he asked. "The circumstances that brought us together?" Natalie thought about the question seriously before answering. "I regret the pain and the mistakes I made. I regret Robert's betrayal and my father's rejection. But I cannot regret anything that led me to you and the life we have built. Every difficult moment, every heartbreak, every tear, they all brought me here to this moment with you. So, no, I do not regret it. I would go through it all again if I knew it would end with us together." "I love you," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "More now than even the day I married you. Every day with you is a gift, Natalie. I love you too. You saved me that day on the street in La Junta. But you did so much more than that. You showed me what real love looks like. You taught me that my worth was not defined by my mistakes or other people's judgment. You gave me a family and a home and a life more beautiful than anything I could have imagined for myself. You are my hero, James Xavier, and my very best friend." They renewed their vows the next day in a small chapel in Denver, just the two of them and a minister, speaking the same promises they had made 10 years earlier, but with even deeper understanding of what those words meant. When they returned home to the ranch, they found their 4 children had conspired with Mrs. Patterson to throw a surprise celebration, complete with a cake Emma and Rose had helped bake and decorations Matthew had carefully hung throughout the house. As Natalie looked around at the family gathered in their home, at the ranch stretching out beyond the windows, at the life she and James had created together from nothing but kindness and hope and determination, she felt a peace and contentment that went bone deep. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with the man she was meant to be with, living the life she was meant to live. That night, after the children were finally in bed and she and James were alone in their room, she pulled him close and whispered against his lips, "Thank you for finding me that day. Thank you for saying, 'You are safe now,' and meaning it. Thank you for keeping that promise every single day since." "Always," James promised, kissing her with the same tenderness and passion that had marked their relationship from the beginning. "I will always keep you safe. I will always love you. That is a promise I will keep until my last breath." And he did. Through the years that followed, through the joys and challenges that life brought, through the raising of their children and the welcoming of grandchildren, through growing old together on the land they both loved, James Xavier kept his promise. He loved Natalie fiercely and gently, passionately and tenderly, completely and unconditionally. He was her safe harbor, her greatest champion, her truest love. When they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren on the ranch that had been their home for so many decades, Natalie looked at her husband's weathered face and still saw the handsome cowboy who had stopped his horse on a dusty street in La Junta, and asked if she was all right. She saw the man who had offered her shelter when she had nowhere to go, who had defended her when others judged, who had loved her when she felt unlovable, and who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. "I would do it all again," James told her that night as they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you again and again, Natalie. You are the best decision I ever made." "And you are mine," she replied, threading her fingers through his. "The very best decision of my life." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one overhead. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something extraordinary together. Their love story had begun with desperation and kindness, with a simple promise spoken on a dusty street. "You are safe now." And from that promise had grown a lifetime of love, a family, a legacy that would endure for generations. As the moon rose over the mountains and the night settled around them, Natalie rested her head on James's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. She was safe, she was loved, she was home, and that was everything she had ever needed.